Another early morning drive, another 6-liter L96 and an early JK, which is a great combination. But let's talk about the transfer case. We just installed a 5-to-1 Atlas II with this L96 6-liter, which is a pretty steep gear ratio for a transfer case, especially when you combine it with the 6L80, because the 6L80 has a 4-to-1 low ratio first gear. And I get this question a lot. Let's go over it. This is actually an older build from several years ago. It came in to get the Atlas 5-to-1 transfer case and to be upgraded to a variable speed fan. I'm not sure if there's a Pennstar or a Camaro fan in this. It really is amazing how good these 6-liters run when you consider how inexpensive they are. They run on regular gas and they run for hundreds of thousands of miles. Really is a great motor in a JK. Merging onto the freeway is nothing like it used to be with a V6. Just a little bit of throttle and you're at the speed limit. We got this customer an extra 20 or 30 horsepower through tuning. The 6-liter is a very conservative engine when you get it from GM, because they install these in heavy-duty trucks like this one you see up here in front of me, and they know that they're going to have a high duty cycle, so they're very conservative on the spark timing and fuel delivery. Opening these things up can easily get you 20-30 horsepower. Even though this is an early build with a late model interior, we still have full cruise control function, air conditioning, tap shift in this because it's a 2011. We've been doing these LS-JK swaps for a long time, since 2009. A lot of guys don't know that. So we're going to talk mainly about 4 different transfer cases. There's others out there, but let's talk about the transfer cases that mostly apply to the JK LS swap. The most popular transfer case, and the one you'll most likely use, is the 241J, J for Jeep. The 2007 to 2017 Jeeps use the 241J. Now there are some caveats there. From 2007 to 2011, both the automatics and the manuals used basically the same 241J, and that transfer case works perfect in an LS swap. You're going to change out the front input gear to a 32 spline input, which makes it much stronger than the original smaller input. Fortunately, in 2007 to 11, both the 42 RLE transmission, the automatic, and the NSG 370 6-speed manual use the same output shaft. Once that input gear is replaced, it's strong. It'll hold up behind a 6-liter and even a 6.2 with no issues. In 2012, Jeep added the 5-speed, the WA580 to the JK. The WA580 has an odd and different output shaft. It has basically a female output on the transmission and a male input on the transfer case. So you can't use that transfer case in your JK swap if it's from a 2012 and 2017 automatic JK. Now you can use a 2012 and 2017 manual transmission 241J because they stayed with the same output shaft as the earlier 241J. Unfortunately, you can't use a 241J or a 241OR from an automatic 2012 up JK, and I get a lot of questions on that. The bottom line is 2012 and up automatic transmissions are not supported in the swap. 2007 to 2017 manual transmission 241Js are supported in the swap. 2007 to 2011 automatic transmission 241Js are supported in the swap. 2012 and 2017 automatic transfer cases are not supported. The second variety of transfer cases put into the JK is the OR, the off-road, or the HD as Chrysler lists it, the heavy duty. Really what it is a 241J with a 4-to-1 front planetary. The 241J has a 2.72 front planetary low ratio. The Rubicon transfer case essentially comes in Rubicons, JKU, Rs, and JKRs. and it gives you a 4-to-1 low ratio. The 4-to-1 low ratio Rubicon transfer case works great with a V6. The automatic Chrysler transmission, first gear, whether it's the earlier 4-speed or the 5-speed, is around 3-to-1. The 4 and 5-speed Chrysler automatic transmissions do not have as low of a first gear as the 6L80. The 6L80 has a 4-to-1 low gear ratio, where the Chrysler transmissions are closer to 3-to-1. A stock Rubicon, early Rubicon with a 241 OR has 11-to-1 overall low ratio. That's because you got a 4-to-1 transfer case and approximately a 3-to-1 first gear. If you add a 4-to-1 first gear out of a 6L80, you've now got 16-to-1. And this is important because when you're off-road and you want to go into 4-low, you need to get wheel speed up for certain conditions like running trails, mud, snow, sand. If you gear way down and you have a 16-to-1 ratio, that means 4-low is not going to be very useful except when you're crawling or descending really steep hills. Other than that, you're going to end up having to go into 4-high, and you're going to have this giant gap in between the two. So be careful if you choose to run anything lower than a 3-to-1 transfer case if you intend to use 4-wheel drive on trails and mud, snow, and sand. We're going to go down this little incline. First gear. I've actually got to throttle it to go down this hill. Alright, we're going up in a second. Now, if I let my foot off the throttle, it just brings me to a stop. Let's get a little steeper here. I'll throttle it up. Okay, now normally here with a 3-to-1 box, I got to give it a little bit of braking. Yeah, this box doesn't care. I've actually got to give it throttle to go down this hill. We're going to bump it up a gear. We put the bump shift switch up here for this customer. That feels pretty good. Let's go back down. Yeah, it just basically brought me to a stop. 2 miles an hour, 1 mile an hour. The other issue with the 4-to-1 OR or HD Rubicon transfer case, back in the day with 200 horsepower V8s and the 4L65 transmissions, that worked well. With these modern engines putting out 400 and 500 horsepower, that smaller input is not as strong as it should be, and you might have some issues. There is adapters out there to put an OR transfer case behind an LS, but I don't recommend it for 2 reasons. 1, the ratio is just too low for general off-roading, as we discussed already, and 2, that front planetary, especially with a 400 or 500 horsepower 6.2, is too weak in my opinion. We've seen the output shafts on the 4L65s twist, even on 6 liters like the one I'm driving right now. So if you step up to a 6L80 or even a 6L90, you're going to have a much stronger output. And by replacing that front input with a 241C, the 241C was a Chevy transfer case that was used behind the 4L80s, and it was designed for the heavy-duty applications. And we've run them in 450 and 500 horsepower JKs with no problem at all. Going back to the 241 OR, we don't recommend it. 1, I don't feel it's as strong as it needs to be for the higher horsepower applications, and 2, I don't feel the gear ratio is optimal for general off-roading. Going back to the 241J, it's an excellent transfer case. The 241J has been used all the way back to the TJs in these Jeeps. It is a chain-driven transfer case using lightweight automatic transmission fluid. The 241J does incorporate an oil pump. It is very quiet, very low friction. Jeep decided to not include unlocking hubs in the JK. Unlocking hubs have the advantage of releasing the front axle from the transfer case. I personally like unlocking hubs. I think it makes the vehicle steer better. It probably does save a little bit of fuel, and parts don't wear out as rapidly. Jeep decided for the production cost of the hubs, there wasn't that much gain. Jeep is claiming minimal additional wear, tear, and drag, and they've determined that it was not worth installing locking hubs in the JK, so that's what we have. What you have to remember is if you don't have unlocking hubs, every time you go around a turn, especially at speed, you're driving that front drive shaft, you're spinning it up at a differential speed to the rear drive shaft. So both the counter shaft and the main shaft in the transfer case are spinning at different speeds. What that can lead to is friction. Because the 241J is chain driven, uses lightweight, low viscosity ATF transmission fluid, it really works well on a JK. You could be going 80 miles an hour through shallow turn and the transfer case doesn't build up that much heat. It also has an oil pump built in internally which helps distribute the oil. Let's talk a little bit about the Atlas transfer cases. There's basically two different Atlas transfer cases that guys put in JKs. Actually, there's three Atlas products that guys use in these JKs. One would be the Ruby Crawler, but we're not going to talk about that because it doesn't apply to the LS. And one thing you have to remember is when you put an LS or a Hemi into a JK, you're increasing the firing pulses to 2 more per revolution. You're increasing the torque dramatically. So you don't necessarily need the short gear ratio that you would require if you had a V6. These V8s have a lot of torque, and especially when you're running the GM transmissions with the ultra low first gears, it really negates the need to run those low ratios. So when we look at the Atlas, you got the Atlas 2 and the Atlas 4, and an Atlas 4 is similar to the Atlas 2, but they have the high-low section in front. I do not recommend running the Atlas 4. Advanced does not recommend running the Atlas 4 behind a V8. And the reality is the Atlas 4 is larger, not as strong, uses more horsepower, more drivetrain loss. We have done Atlas 4s, and the customers that we've done Atlas 4 builds with say that they probably would have been just as happy with the Atlas 2, if not happier. So I suggest you don't go with an Atlas 4. The Atlas 2 is an excellent transfer case, and we've done dozens of them in our builds. The Atlas 2 is a gear-driven transfer case, which means the main shaft and the counter shaft are driven through gears rather than through a chain. This means we have to run a gear oil, a heavier weight oil. Now we have to talk about the internal performance of this transfer case. In the same scenario, going 80 miles an hour through the mountains of Colorado in a shallow turn without unlocking hubs, you're spinning these gears up pretty fast, and friction can build up and heat can build up. So this is a consideration. Now, these transfer cases have been improved over the years. So what advantage do you get by purchasing an Atlas over a 241? It's a lot of money, and I get this question all the time. What is it going to do for me? Well, it depends on your need. The Atlas transfer case is a twin stick transfer case. If you look down here, you can see that we have 2 shift levers. One is for the front axle and one is for the rear axle. Each shift lever has 3 positions: low, neutral, and high. What that means is you can engage the front axle and not the rear. You can engage the rear axle and not the front. You can engage the rear axle in low, or you can engage the rear axle in high. So it's a very versatile transfer case, and it gives you modes that you can't get with a 241J. For instance, when I go to Arizona and I go to Jerome and I go up the back way, there's a switchback trail that basically goes from about 2,000 to 8,000 feet. You all know that when you're in 4-wheel drive, you have to fight the steering wheel when you're going through a lot of these tight turns. Well, with an Atlas, you can release the front axle by just engaging the rear axle, and you'll have your low ratio, because with the Atlas you can choose 2-wheel drive low. Now you can choose 2-wheel drive low using your front axle, or you can choose 2-wheel drive low using your rear axle. I would engage my rear axle in 2-wheel drive low ratio, release the front axle, That way I can cruise up those tight switchback trails and have my steering free. Another option would be snow. If you want front wheel drive, you could put it in two-wheel drive high, only engage the front axle, and that way you can have front wheel drive for the snow. So the Atlas has a lot of versatility that the 241J does not have. But the question is are you ever going to use it? The reality is the 241J is very user-friendly. It's a single stick. If you have a Rubicon or lockers and you lock your front differential, your rear differential, and then put it in four-wheel drive, you've essentially got as much traction as you're going to get. All four wheels are locked together. With a 241J, you are not going to have the option of front-wheel drive or two-wheel drive low. You're going to notice with a V8 in your JK, a lot of the trails that you used to run in 4 low, you're going to run in 4 high. With a 4-to-1 low ratio in the 6L80, it really changes things. And what it does is it allows you to run through those low-speed obstacles in a high range, so when you're done with that obstacle, get wheel speed up easily. Driving in four-wheel drive low, it's not easy to get wheel speed without revving the motor up. And while the V6 needs to do that, the V8 doesn't. When we install an Atlas into a JK, we have the main Atlas transfer case, obviously. Advanced builds these Atlas 2s for our swap specifically. They're set up so that they don't have a vehicle speed sensor. The vehicle speed sensors are inside the 6L80 and the 8L90, so we don't have to worry about trying to fit one to the transmission output shaft. The JK run cable driven shifter. In some ways I do prefer the direct drive shifter like the old TJs had. They feel more solid. You're going to find that when your Atlas is new, it's going to be a little bit difficult to get into gear. So with an Atlas 2, think of all the options that you have. You can run in two-wheel drive high with just the rear axle driving like I am now. You can drive in front-wheel drive high. I don't recommend you drive in front-wheel drive unless you have to, like you break a rear axle, at least on the highway. But it can help in certain conditions like mud or snow. You can run in two-wheel drive low, driving either the front or the rear axle. You can drive in four-wheel drive, where all four wheels are driving. You can engage a front locker, assuming you have selectable lockers. You can lock one axle. You can lock both axles. The number of options with the Atlas exceed the original transfer case's options. But the question is do you need it? You have to ask yourself that question. If you rarely go off-road and you only run light trail or easy trails, you don't need an Atlas. Don't waste the money on it. If you're going to find yourself in a situation like you're at Moab or tight switchbacks in the mountains of Colorado, Atlas is very useful. I think along with the transfer case, we have to talk about lockers. And there's a lot of different options on lockers. If you have a Rubicon, you've got front and rear selectable lockers. Selectable lockers mean you can turn them on and off from the cab. Whether that's an e-locker, an electronic locker, or a air locker, like an ARB, they're selectable. Everybody has their own opinion on which one's better. I like e-lockers because I believe they're easier to hook up. There's no onboard compressor. There is no lines to plumb. It's all done electronically. Up in the northern climates, you don't get moisture inside the lines. You don't get spit back into solenoids. Now the ARBs have the advantage of instant engagement. They are very positive. They're very strong. So I don't think either one's better than the other. If you have an e-locker in your Rubicon that came in your stock Dana 44s, they're very capable. So if you have Dana 44s, the e-lockers are a good option. The second type of locker is called an automatic locker. And automatic lockers are like the Aussie lockers or the Lockrights. And what they do is they're essentially cam driven, and they drive these cups or cones outward when you apply torque, which basically locks the two axle shafts together. This is really an economy locker. I'm not a big fan of them in a daily driven vehicle. You're going to hear clicking when you go around turns. You're going to hear clunking when you accelerate and decelerate as the cam action does its thing. So I'm not a big fan of automatic lockers on the street. If I had an off-road vehicle that was mainly used off-road, automatic lockers are great. There's a whole host of positive traction style lockers in between. Torsons, True Tracks, you name it. And essentially they're just intermediate between a selectable locker and no locker, or an open differential. And everybody has, again, their preference on that. When you combine lockers with the transfer case, depending on which way you go, you're going to end up with a very capable vehicle. With selectable lockers, you're going to be able to essentially lock all four wheels together, the center transfer case and both axles, and that's going to give you about as much traction as you can get. And you can do that even with a 241J and stock Dana 44 axles. The question is do you need anything more than that? For most guys, the answer is no. I'm still driving a 241J in my Rubicon. I do wish I had the option of two-wheel drive low. There's been occasions where I have to fight the steering wheel on tight mountain roads, and I wish I had that option of unlocking my front differential. I also wish I had unlocking hubs in the front. Everything I had before my JK had unlocking hubs, and I do notice a difference when I unlock them. And there are unlocking hub options out there if you want to spend the money. Getting back to the differential lockers, there's also a differential locker that most guys aren't aware of, and it's called brake locking differentials, or BLD. This is built into the electronic stability program, or the ESP part of your JK. And the way it works is the way Land Rover has essentially been doing their four-wheel drive systems for years. You have wheel speed sensors at each corner of your JK, and they know how fast each wheel is going. So if you're driving through the sand and you bog down and you have an open differential, essentially when you give it throttle, the drive shaft's going to put power into the carrier, and it's going to transfer the power to the wheel with the least amount of traction. So what you're going to end up doing is just spinning one wheel and the other wheel's not going to spin. What brake locking differentials do is they can sense that that one wheel is spinning, and they will brake that wheel independently of the other wheels, which will then transfer power over to the other wheel. Therefore, you have now two wheels driving. And if you're in four-wheel drive in a stock JK, you can have all four wheels driving. And I have tested BLD, and it works. It's a little bit odd. You do have to, unfortunately, dig somewhat of a hole before it kicks in. But I have been in some pretty steep grades that I was not going to get up with open differentials. When I would get stuck, I would simply hold the throttle on lightly, and as two of the wheels would spin, slowly the electronic stability program would brake those wheels, and I could feel the traction coming into the other wheels, and I would pull out of it. It really is amazing how well it works, considering all it is electronics and no hard part, using the brakes to actually mimic lockers. Is it as good as a selectable locker? Of course not. It's not even as good as an automatic locker, but it might get you out of a hole if you didn't have it. Determine your need. Your need and your budget will determine what you go with. If you have a JK with a 241J that is a non-Pentastar automatic, and you don't have the need, and you're not going to do heavy off-roading, the 241J is hard to beat. You already have the transfer case. You're going to get everything you need in our transfer case adapter kit to convert it to work with a V8. It's going to be strong enough even for a high-performance 6.2. It's low cost, it's low friction, it's low heat. It's just a great transfer case. If you have a late model JK with an automatic transmission, a Pentastar JK, then you're going to have to replace that transfer case. If you have a Rubicon transfer case, it's a very easy process to swap it out for a J. You'll have a strong transfer case. Atlas transfer cases are going to run you just north of $3,000. Remember, it's not just the transfer case. You've got a shifter assembly, cables, and electronics. The electronics interface the JK transfer case range sensor so that your ESP modes and dash light work as they should. So if you want to spend that money and you want to get the additional functionality, the Atlases are great.